Welcome back to the Running Explained podcast. Hi, I'm Coach Elisabeth, and I'm here to break down the science of running in a way that actually makes sense. Whether you're training for your very first race, aiming for a new PR, or just trying to be a more balanced runner, this podcast is your go-to spot for all things running. At Running Explained, running is more than just about logging miles. It's about becoming the best version of you. That's why we talk about more than just improving your fitness, but how to support your physical, mental, and emotional health too, so you'll see improvements that go far beyond race times. And if you're looking for more support, I've got you covered. Whether you're interested in one-on-one coaching, following a structured training plan, or joining our supportive group coaching, I've got options to meet you where you are and help you level up. Ready to dive in? Let's go. My guest this week is runner and running journalist Ashley Mateo. Ashley knows a lot about the trends in the running community, and that's what she's here to talk about. What is she seeing? What are people talking about? Where are we going? What's the new technology? What are the new trends? What are the new fads? Well, that's what we talk about. Yeah, the whole episode. Have fun. Ashley, welcome back to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
So give us a quick update. What have you been up to for people who don't know who you are? Go ahead and reintroduce yourself.
What have I been up to? Well, I am a running journalist and also a running coach. I'm based in Colorado. You've probably read stories I've written in Runner's World and Outside Run, maybe the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine. If they publish stories about running, then I am writing for them.
And I guarantee you've definitely read it's so funny to me when I go through and click through, Runner's World or another online publication, and I'm like, scroll. Oh yeah, another Ashley story. Like, very cool.
There are times where I Google running related topics myself and click on a story and I'm like, oh, I already answered this question.
I wrote a whole piece about it.
Yes. But I love when friends tell me they've searched for some kind of running advice and one of my articles comes up and I'm like, yes, happy to tell you more.
Yes. That's the way it should be, sharing information.
Yeah.
And obviously, because of your work in running media, you are kind of at the forefront of understanding where a lot of these trends are and seeing what a lot of companies are doing and a lot of publications are doing, just kind of where the trends are heading. And so that's why we're talking about that today. Before we dive into it, I want to ask you 3 fun questions. You don't have to overthink it. They don't have to be one sentence, one word answers, but just some fun running quick questions. So my first question is, if you could have an all expenses guaranteed race entry trip for any race in the entire world, what would it be?
Antarctica, the Antarctica Marathon.
All right.
It's on the bucket list.
Is that, what time of year do they hold that? I assume the always summer, the always light part of the year.
Yes, there are 2. I forget the exact names of each one, but one is in December and one is in March. I have my eyes on the March one.
And it's all on snowpack, well, because it's Antarctica.
I think so. I think it's on a research island, so there might be some gravelly type surfaces, but I'm assuming it's in their summertime, but I'm still assuming it's covered in snowpack.
That's so cool. Good one to choose for an all expenses paid trip, because going to Antarctica is so expensive.
It's like $12,000 minimum, and it can be over $20,000 if you want it to be. So
easily. Yeah, no, I would love to go to
exactly
Antarctica.
Affordable on a journalist salary.
No, that's why you should pitch somebody. Come sponsor, I'll write all about it. Antarctica, running a marathon. Awesome. So next question, what is your favorite running fuel of the moment?
I have been using Never Second gels since last summer. I started alternating them with my go-to Morton because they have more sodium in them, and they have been a game changer, especially as races just keep getting hotter.
Yeah. Is there a flavor that you like?
Berry. Only berry. I haven't even tried the other one.
Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And last but not least, this might be a tough one for you because I know that you have access to and have run in a ton of different shoes, but what is your all-time holy grail favorite pair of running shoes that you have ever had?
Oh, that's really hard. I don't think I have an all-time ever favorite because technology is just advancing so much. I think I would have said last year the Adios Pro Evo from Adidas, the crazy $500 world record breaking shoe.
Like they last exactly one race. And then they're
No,
kind
it
of
lasted for me. It lasted 100 miles, and then I actually broke one of the carbon rods in it. So the foam was still great, but somehow I broke a carbon rod. But then they released the Adios Pro 4, which took a lot of the things that I loved about the Evo and put it in a much more affordable, probably a little more accessible to the regular runner shoe. So now I'm like, well, I really like that one. But then there's a whole bunch of other shoes that are coming out that I'm really excited about. So I don't think I could pick a holy grail shoe.
So what did they keep from the very expensive shoe that you liked in the newer version of the moderately expensive shoe?
So the Pro 4 has the same rocker point, I believe, as the Evo, which worked really well for me because I'm very much a 4-foot runner. And so the way the geometry is on that shoe just really worked with my stride. And they also used the more advanced foam. It's not quite the same formulation, I think, as what you'll find in the Evo, but it's much softer than what was in the previous versions of the Pro. And so I put it on and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, this is good. And I think it's more durable than the Evo.
How did you realize that you'd broken part of the carbon rod in that shoe? Did you
Well,
hear it? Did it snap?
I didn't hear it in the moment, but I had been doing a track workout and then I got kicked off the track because school started and I had just started too late that morning. So I was like, all right, I have a 1K rep left. I'll just do it on the sidewalk. And I did it. I finished it. I ran into a friend. And so I took my headphones out and then I heard the like creaking sound of what was definitely a broken carbon rod. I didn't feel it. It wasn't an issue. Honestly, I could probably still wear the shoes, but I don't think anybody would advise that. And the noise is really, it's bad. I think I just hit a curb at like the wrong angle, like a curb that was slightly raised, just on a sidewalk. It didn't hurt. It didn't break my stride in any way, but it did break the plate.
Oopsies.
Oops.
Yeah. Well, today we are, like I said, talking about running trends 2025 and beyond, and trends in the running world in terms of cultural trends, community trends, technology trends, those types of things. In terms of the technology coming down the pipeline for us runners, our gear, our shoes, our watches, what's the next big thing?
Okay, where do we start with that? Let's get like tech out of the way first. I think I haven't personally seen a lot of innovations in tracking technology or anything like that lately. I think, you can get a great running watch at this point for relatively inexpensive, and it's going to do everything you need to do. And frankly, you don't need one that overcomplicates things because most runners don't need a watch that tracks VO2 max or vertical oscillation or things like that. Just like pace, distance, good GPS, you're good. There are a lot of other interesting tech things that are still in a very like nascent phase, I would say. I was recently reporting an article on nutrition technology, and there are things like continuous glucose monitors, lactate sensors. What was the other one we talked about there? Things in that realm that they're not quite there yet. There might be performance applications, but so far the research shows that you don't need to invest in specifically a CGM for runners. I think you need a lot more knowledge and understanding of how those devices work before you can actually use them in a way that boosts performance. And even nutritionists are just like, not yet. One that is beneficial to runners that I talked about with nutritionists is sweat testing. That's something that really anyone can benefit from. You don't have to do a high-tech test, but there are new wearables like Nix, and I think H-Drop is one. Precision Hydration offers a test that you can go in for. I'm actually getting a test at Scratch Labs soon to test that out. And so I've talked about this a lot. Running is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. The chances of you racing in 70 degrees is like, that's a pretty safe bet.
That's kind of the new normal, unfortunately.
Yeah,
That's
like
warm.
it doesn't even matter the season. I mean, I just ran a 5K in Miami on February 1st. I don't even know what day it is anymore. And it was 74 degrees at the start line with 94% humidity. It was horrible conditions. The race was good. But I think investing in something like that can actually be helpful to runners when it comes to understanding what they individually need to fuel whatever distance they're racing and even their training runs. Because when you're not getting the electrolytes you need in your fueling strategy, you're going to hit the wall.
Everybody who's listening, if you're running at above an hour in duration, and if you're running at all in hot weather, you have to understand how much fluid you need. And I love that that's becoming more accessible. What I think is very interesting about these types of things is that with all technological advances, we have kind of the very expensive front runner, and it's not accessible and it's very complicated. And then it slowly becomes more accessible, but still very expensive. And then slowly but surely it becomes more accessible and less expensive and less expensive. I think I've also heard about the lactate, like the near infrared lactate sensors, which is very cool. You don't have to take blood to measure your lactate. You can just, have a wearable. But I think it's interesting what you said about our watches in that, most people don't need all of those fancy metrics, but that's how a lot of companies sell the more expensive versions, because they pack it full of all these features like your heat acclimation percentage score and your body battery. And I know for most people, it's just confusing. It's just like data overload, but it's a selling point to get you to buy the expensive thing.
It is, because you think that the best of the best are doing these things or using these metrics to get every little bit of potential out of themselves. And really, regular runners, people who have day jobs, who have families, who have lives outside of running, they would be so much better served by zeroing in on getting enough sleep, eating enough food, and just consistent movement. Not just your exercise, not just your, let's say marathon training plan, but are you also walking throughout the day, or are you sitting at your desk for 8 hours and potentially blunting the response of the exercise you're doing? So I think it's cool that technology is innovating in that way. And I think there are things that we can definitely learn from those more advanced metrics. But I also think the majority of people really just need to zero in on those three main pillars of health. And that will take them a lot further than like a, lactate sensor. I don't know what the latest research shows, but I think what you have to be really careful of when you have all of that information at your fingertips is the effect that it can have on your mental health. So I know that when I started training a little more seriously and I had a really high-tech watch, this wasn't even a specifically high-tech feature, but the Garmin, productivity feature, it messed with my head so much during one training cycle where almost every day of that training cycle, I was told I was unproductive. And I was following a training plan with a coach, but I let it get in my head and it really made me doubt my training and my capabilities. And so I stopped wearing that. I stopped using that feature. And now I'm much more careful about the weight that I put on certain metrics. Like, for example, I did a 5K this weekend. I was traveling. I could tell that some of my metrics were tanking a little bit. My sleep suffered. My readiness suffered. I was using an Oura ring versus a watch for these biomarkers. But I knew heading into the race, I was like, this is probably not, I'm not going to feel my best. But I'm still going to try, because just because my watch says that doesn't mean I should give up. And I still ran a great race. So I think I've moved into a much healthier place in terms of how I absorb that data. And I think it can be very hard for newer runners to put up those boundaries around their data consumption, because they think this is what every runner does and what every runner uses. And frankly, I think most runners could benefit more from learning how to run by feel than relying so totally on their watch. And myself included, I'm very bad at pacing myself if I don't have a watch, telling me what 10 to 15 second range I'm in. I always go too fast. So it does have its purposes, but you also have to learn how to listen to your body's cues and what your body is telling you over what this supercomputer on your wrist says.
So moving from the the wearable tech, what are the other technological trends, innovations that you are seeing?
Well, I think I want to talk about shoes because I love talking about shoes. And I think your point about the way high tech is trickling down into these devices is even more important when it comes to shoe technology. So I think we spent a couple years where brands were just innovating. They were doing everything they could to make the most high-tech race day shoes for their elite athletes in order to break that 2-hour barrier, break the world records, whatever it is. And then because of rules within the sport, those shoes also have to be released to the public. And so we got some really, really high-end racing shoes that were only really meant for the top 1% of runners out there. But when you see an elite athlete breaking crazy records in this shoe, you think, well, I need that shoe. That's the fastest shoe. It's going to make me faster if it makes them faster. And that's just not how shoes work. I've talked to a lot of people who say, well, I can put anybody in this shoe and it'll make them faster. And I'm like, well, that's not true, because we've seen a lot of more recent research coming out that says the benefits of these carbon-plated racing shoes are actually very dependent on the type of runner that you are. So if you are a slower runner, and that's not a dig against anybody, that's just facts. If you are slower than a certain pace, you're probably not going to see the same improvements in energy return as somebody who is, a 5 to 6 minute miler. And in some cases, if you are not built to optimize the features in those shoes, whether it's the geometry of a shoe, we were talking about, the really aggressive geometry on something like the Adios Evo, Pro Evo, I can never say that name right. Or if you don't have the foot strength to handle the super high stacks of foam, or you're spending more time on the ground because you are, again, running at those slower paces, some of those features might actually hurt you instead of help you. And at the end of the day, the best shoe for any marathoner is the one you feel most comfortable in, not the one that's marketed as the fastest shoe. So that's all to say, we're starting to see some of that technology trickle down into shoes designed for the everyday runner who actually has an average pace of around a 10, 15 minute mile. And so because we as an industry spent a lot of time investing in those higher end shoes, now brands are able to take that technology, like the super lightweight foams, like the geometry, and tweak them for the more middle of the pack runners, which I think is great, because then you're seeing shoes like the Glycerin Max, which came out recently, the Adidas Evo SL, which is more of a daily training shoe. These are really optimized for the biomechanics of a regular runner, somebody who's running that 8 to 10 minute mile. They're spending a little more time on the ground. Their biomechanics are better supported by the designs of these shoes. But we wouldn't have these shoes without the original innovation in the high-end racing shoes. So I think that's really cool. And as that technology becomes more accessible and available, these shoes are getting less expensive too, which is nice. At the running event this year, we saw a lot of shoes that were in that $140 to $160 range, which is obviously not cheap. I recognize that that's still a fair amount to pay for a pair of shoes, but it's not $250, $275, $500. Most people can afford to invest in those if that type of shoe is important to them. So I think that's a really good trend we're seeing.
That's a really good point you bring up about the rules about shoes. That I don't think a lot of people realize this is the reason that those very expensive, very high performance shoes are even available for us to buy, are because they have to be in order for those athletes to wear them in competition.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise they wouldn't. And they didn't. There was a relatively recent rule change, and relatively meaning last 10 years or so, where the shoe, if you were an elite athlete wearing a shoe in competition, the shoe that you're wearing had to have been on sale to the public for a specific period of time beforehand. So you had all these shoe companies releasing these shoes. I think it's for the 2016 Olympics or one of the big cycles, for the first time, because before it was just oh, what are they wearing? Oh, that athlete's wearing a prototype that you can't buy.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to kind of level the field a little bit in terms of shoe technology for elite athletes by saying, okay, well, this has to be a shoe that's available to purchase.
Yes. And that's why you see brands like Adidas doing 1,000 pair drop in order to ensure that their athletes can race in it without actually doing a mass commercial whatever. I don't know all the rules about that, to be totally honest. So I can't really go in depth on like what brands have to do in order to meet those requirements, but it does make it so we see some of those innovations a little sooner than we may have in the past.
And are those innovations that you're seeing, and I know especially at the running event, shoes are getting lighter. Like by and large, shoes are getting lighter for everybody, not just at the higher level, the more expensive level, because of the new technology and being able to use those foams in more quote unquote normal shoes.
Yeah. I think I did a story on how light is too light when the Evo came out, because that was I forget what the exact weight was, but it was the lightest super shoe for racing on the market at that point. And you have to remember, it's not the lightest shoe ever. We used to have much more minimal shoes, especially on the track, that weighed almost nothing because they were like wearing almost nothing. The difference now is you're getting these big stack heights and lots of cushioning that's lighter than it's ever been before. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop, or if the foam gets more advanced, so we need less cushioning, so those stack heights start to decrease a little bit. Because what we saw at the running event was they're still increasing, not drastically, like we're not seeing, 58 millimeter shoes from every single brand, although there is one out there. But almost every brand was adding like at least 2 millimeters to the majority of their shoes, which you're able to do because these foams are so much lighter now that you can add the stack without adding weight. And in some cases, you're even losing weight because of other features like cutouts and whatnot. But I think that lightweight factor is really nice, because now you have a lot of trainers that people also feel comfortable going the distance in, because they're not kind of dragging them down.
And the stats on the Adizero Adios Pro Evo 1 has a shoe weight of 4.9 ounces.
Yeah.
That's incredibly light.
But I wouldn't be surprised if we see even lighter shoes coming this year. Crazy. I mean, that was an outlier at that point, and now brands have been creeping, closer and closer to that weight in multiple models. Of course, I can't think of them off the top of my head right now, but it's definitely becoming more commonplace. I think the closest shoe to that at the time was the Vaporfly from Nike. And since then, the list in that like under 7 ounce category has gotten a lot longer than it was at that point.
I think the Vaporfly is even still closer to 6 ounces.
Oh yeah, the Vaporfly was like the next lightest after that, but it was like the Metaspeed from Asics is also really light. That fits in that category, like I would say the top 5 lightest, but that's growing a lot with what we've seen just over the past year or so.
For anybody who has a newer pair of shoes and an older pair of shoes, like 5 or 10 years old, because I know a lot of you do have those somewhere in your closet, take them out and see how different they are, because I don't think we realized how quote unquote heavy some of our older shoes felt at the time. It was normal for us to wear these
even if you look
11
at
ounce shoes.
The most recent Bondi, which is a boat of a shoe, that's the whole thing. It's just like it was the OG max cushion shoe. Just from the 8 to the 9, which just came out, they lost an ounce on that.
Wow.
Without getting rid of any cushioning.
Any trends in the technology around hydration or fueling that you have seen? And not in terms of like research and breakthroughs, but like things that people are making and selling that are new and different.
No, I think the biggest trend within nutrition and I guess hydration at this point is that just people are doing more of it. We've seen so many people increasing the amount of fuel they're taking in on a run, which is awesome. And nothing makes me more annoyed than when people try to shame other people for that. Like, you don't actually need that many gels, or why are you carrying that many gels? Like, that's a waste, whatever. It's like, no, studies are definitely showing that we can handle more carbs per hour than we used to think that we could. And it's totally personal, right? The way you fuel is totally unique to your running. And I think we've finally gotten to a point where people are really embracing that and understand that you can only run as well as you fuel. And so it's nice to see this movement on social media of people just embracing carbs and embracing eating and fueling properly whether they're in a training run or in a race, because it's not just about what you do on race day. It's about maintaining those energy levels throughout training so that you can bounce back from your long runs quicker and you're not totally gassed after a track workout. So that makes me really happy to see that, all these women are like hot girls fuel, and, just more is better when it comes to that. And so it's very nice to see like the whole community embracing that. Maybe not the whole community. There's still some haters out there, but
we'll get them. We'll convert them.
Eventually.
When we fuel them and then they run faster than ever, that's how we'll get them.
Right? Somebody on social media said to me recently, like, well, they didn't have gels 25 years ago when they were running marathons. And I was like,
yeah, they did.
Well, even if they did, like, we're objectively faster now. Like
Right.
What we know about nutrition strategies is just so much more advanced. And like, why would you want to do what somebody was doing 25 years ago? Like, I guess you can do that. If you want to do that, great, you do you. But I'm going to do what science has shown is better in the long run. So it's just funny how stuck people get in certain ways of thinking.
Yeah. In my day, we didn't used to. I'm like, well,
right.
we used to or didn't used to do a lot of things, and now we know better.
Right. And if you know better, why would you not do it? Just to be a martyr? If that's what you're into, I guess. Go for it.
I think for some people, that is a part of it. The other thing that is interesting about the trends in fuel, I think maybe we're still riding the wave of this, that not just fueling is more normalized, but that higher carb sources are more available. I remember when the Martin gels came out and it was like, oh my gosh, 25 grams per gel. Oh, that's so nice. That's and at the time it was like one of the most carb, heavy gels out there.
Yeah.
And now it's nothing. Now they have a 40-gram version of Martin and like SIS, and there's so many options for 30 grams and for even like for 43 grams of carbs per gel. That did not exist 5 years ago.
I mean, I just think the fact that there are so many options and so many different ways for people to get the fuel that they need, whether they prefer something that's a little more real food tasting or they want something that's just like super liquidy. I like Never Second because it's like something I can sip. Whereas even I like Morton, that's my other option, but sometimes that consistency just like does not work well for me, especially when it's hotter or like towards the end of a race. So I just think that we have this whole spectrum now, and it's the same thing as shoes, right? The more that's on the market, the better it is for the community because everybody is different and you have to find out what works for you. And maybe that takes some trial and error and it's not an immediate thing, but I don't know. I think more is better. Everybody benefits in that case.
What's interesting about this is this seems to be one of the, I want to say a trend, but a piece of information and implementation that was top down, right? This was sports science, looking at the research about carb intake. I think this probably started more in the like cycling world because 6, 7, 8 hours in the bike, and then kind of trickled over to the running world, and then runners started fueling, and then it kind of trickled down into the regular running world. What I think is interesting is that what it means is when we're looking at endurance athletes across disciplines around the world, it's not just runners, it's everybody who is an endurance athlete is now embracing, hey, fueling is actually pretty awesome. We should do more of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally driven by science, which is great. I mean, we need more sports science. We especially need more sports science geared specifically towards women because there's a huge gap there. And women are different from men. So our fueling strategies could be different from men in the same way, what we wear is different and the way we run is different. And so I'm glad to see that the science is reaching the masses. We just need more of it at this point.
Speaking of that, I want to say trend specifically, differentiating female specific research just in general in sport. I will say it's been trendy recently. Do you see this actually sticking? Is this a new age for research looking at women specifically in sports performance?
I hope so. I mean, at this point, we know that women are not small men, and so we shouldn't be treated the same way. And I feel like I shouldn't even open the door to this topic because people just get so riled up about it. But Ruth Chepngetich at Chicago this year, breaking the 2-hour, 10-minute barrier. I mean, people like lost their minds over that. And I'm not going to get into the debates, over whether she's clean or not, because we have no evidence that she's not. I listened to a really good podcast, The Science of Sport, that broke down some of the ways in which she could have reached that time without, any other factors. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that the science for women is very different from the science for men. And so, for example, they said something about like the lower limb stiffness or the length of the lower limb in women is less than in men. And so we may be able to better use carbon in carbon plated shoes to our advantage. So women might see a bigger benefit from those kind of shoes than men do. I don't know if that's true. I'm citing somebody else on a podcast. I know there's been some research looking at how women and men respond differently. At the end of the day, I think everybody responds differently to shoes like that. But the point being, there's never just one reason that somebody is able to do something, right? And so the more research we have looking specifically at women and how they perform, the better other women will be able to adjust their training to suit their needs. I don't think that every aspect of training needs to be tweaked based on gender. I don't personally think that you really need to sync your cycle to your training, for example. There's been a lot of articles about that, but
there's not a lot of everybody I know who even researches on that topic. Like, it's interesting to know, but you don't necessarily need to do anything about it. It's information.
There's no real research showing that you will definitely benefit if you do that. And so I still think we're just in this really early stage of a lot of the female specific research. But the fact that brands are investing in this type of research, whether it's, female specific shoes or researchers, universities, hospitals, whoever are investing in the research side of things with academics, you're getting better conversations and more information out to people to do with that information what they will. And again, running is so individualized that what works for you might not work for me, but we should both have access to the information that could inform those choices.
And there's so much information out there. I think that's the other thing about where we are in the world today, but especially being runners, and especially if you're a newer runner, which we know there are so many, that there is so much information out there from, publications, from social media, from YouTube, from books. Remember books? Yeah. That it can feel like you don't know where to start. And there's so much information coming from so many different sources. It's hard to figure out what is most important.
Yes. I mean, this is one of my big pet topics right now, because I think there is so much misinformation out there that the growth of running is just exposing all of these newer runners to information that can be really hard to sift through. So what I think people forget sometimes is that the majority of people now are getting their information from social media. And the majority of people on social media are not fact checking that information or vetting it in any way. And so I started in print magazines. I mean, this was the very end of the heyday of print magazines, but we still had a research department. We had fact checkers. We had to learn as entry-level employees what the roles of those departments were and how to do those jobs. And that wasn't my job specifically, so I wouldn't even say that I'm an expert in it, but it was just a part of the publication process. And so now, whenever I publish something, whether it's a newsletter, an article, a tweet, do we tweet anymore? No, a thread. I'm always vetting that information before I post it. I'm going to the original source, whether it's a study or a quote from somebody. I'm looking at who said that quote to make sure they're not, sketchy in some way or have some bias, that they're promoting something. And, I've gone through the steps to get myself credentialed through run coaching and just general education within the industry. There are a lot of people out there who I think have really good intentions in sharing information, but they don't do those fact-checking steps. And so then they're sharing things that work for them or that they believe that they saw somewhere that may not actually be grounded in evidence, which I think is really hard for somebody who doesn't know better to find the line between those things.
I want to ask a clarifying question about that though, because it, there are bad actors out there. There are people who are out there just lying through their teeth because they want your dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But and it's so weird to me that those people exist, right? Like, why? But is this a lot of like the Dunning-Kruger effect kind of in action? We just have so many people who don't know what they don't know, that it's not malicious. It's just a lot of stuff we have to sift through.
I think that's probably the majority of it. Obviously, there are those bad actors out there. There are a lot of people peddling their own training plans or supplements or whatever product they might be selling. But I think the majority of it is just people who don't know better, and they don't understand that if you're going to state a fact, and a fact is not, this shoe made me feel faster. That's not a fact. A fact is, you have to run 2 hours to see the benefits of a long run, or no one needs fuel during a half marathon.
That guy was wrong.
And then I had people arguing with me when I said he was wrong, saying that like, you don't need fuel until after 90 minutes. And I was like, well, right, but the average half marathon is 2 hours and 15 minutes. So by that argument, yes, the majority of people do need fuel during a half marathon. And I think that a lot of people approach running advice and information from a very black and white perspective. And as you know, because you're also a coach, most of the time the answer is it depends. And yeah, it would be so great if we could give a nice, clean answer. Like, your running shoes are definitely going to be dead at 300 miles. But that's not how it works. Everybody's different. So whereas like I might get 200 miles out of a pair of shoes, somebody else might be able to get 400 miles because they're much smaller and lighter than me. I don't know. But a lot of nuance gets lost on social media because social media doesn't reward nuance. They want polarizing takes. They want things that like evoke strong emotion, and a very measured, researched prompt doesn't always do that. And so I think there are a lot of people who started out with the best of intentions to share their journey and their experience, but they get caught up in the engagement factor and wanting to reach as many people as possible. And maybe that's because they have brand deals, and so they want to get as many eyeballs on their content as possible. They're just sort of like stoking the fires with information that they haven't vetted. And part of that is on the influencer or the creator or whoever is sharing that online. Anybody, I don't think you have to be an influencer to share bad information unintentionally. Everybody can be better about vetting the information that they share, but consumers also have to be better about using critical thinking and not just taking what somebody says at face value. If you're a new runner and you see somebody say you don't ever need to fuel during a half marathon, you shouldn't be like, oh, okay, so I never need a gel during a half marathon. Noted. You should look that up and say like, well, when do you need to start to fuel in a run? What does the research say? Is there an article on a reputable source like Runner's World or Outside Magazine? I mean, those publications still have built-in checks to make sure that you're not publishing falsehoods, because you can be legally held responsible for bad information. Social media does not have that responsibility. And so that's what makes it hard to hold people accountable for what they say. And that's why I think that content consumers just need to take a beat before they follow any kind of information. Do your homework of just like Googling that and seeing if you can find a more reputable source that either agrees with it or debunks it. It's on both sides. I think everybody has a responsibility to be a little more thoughtful before posting on social media, but it's also on the consumer.
And it's tough, being one of those people who does try to put good information out in the world. And I'm sure you go through this process too, where, we're all still human. And I think there is, on some level, when you are a consumer of information and you look and say that, somebody has made a mistake and post something that isn't as they claim, there's, I'm not saying like this has happened to me and I'm holding some sort of grievance, but there is a kind of like a piling on effect, right? But like, oh, that's not true, that's false, that's a lie, kind of attacking the person, where it's really, I think, important for us to all just be, like you said, cognizant consumers of information and correcting the record when we're wrong. I think that's one of the things that I take the most umbrage with when we have people, let's say that for those of you who aren't as chronically online, maybe as Ashley and I are, the half marathon with no gels thing on Threads, some guy stated that essentially to this effect of, you don't need to take any fuel during a half marathon, like as a fact. And then he got piled on, he ended up deleting the thread. And then it was a kind of ricocheted around Instagram about how absurd and wrong and kind of dangerous that kind of black and white thinking was. But there was no like, oh, hey, guys, I'm so sorry. You know what? I made this in good faith because I never knew it, but I've learned a lot and I was wrong. There's none of that. Even when you point out that people are wrong, there's no learning moment, right? And I don't love being wrong, but I love learning new information. And so that's always interesting to me, that in this media scape, whatever we want to call it, that the retraction or the correction doesn't seem to exist anymore. There's no like learning opportunity.
I think one of the problems is it never gets as much engagement as the first one. So people have just stopped even doing it altogether. I mean, I don't know if there's any like data on that, but I know that there's data on the fact that if you publish something that I don't want to say is just as wrong, but something inflammatory, and then you're like, oh, whoops, I made a mistake. Nobody ever sees the correction. Social media just doesn't reward that, again, because it elevates those sort of emotion evoking posts over matter of fact posts. And so something can go, I mean, you see this in politics all the time, like something can go massively viral and then it's like, oops, we have to issue a correction, and nobody ever sees the correction. It's already too widespread. And so, I mean, the best thing you can really do when you see misinformation like that is really ignore it so it doesn't spread. But at the same time, I don't know. My feeling is most of the time I will ignore things unless I see them starting to grow to a point where adding in a measured response that actually cites some scientific data will help, because I don't want the person who doesn't know any better looking at that and thinking, oh, this is right, I should or shouldn't do something based off this, what this one person is saying. Hopefully, if they're seeing that thread, then maybe they can see my response from a certified coach, from somebody who's been in this industry for over a decade and has talked to academics and pro athletes and all kinds of experts. And maybe that holds a little weight. I don't know. It probably doesn't. People probably don't see it. But that's how I feel better about showing up on these platforms in those kind of scenarios.
There are a number of articles that are published on a regular cadence around debunking myths, but it seems like we're debunking the same myths over and over again. How many debunking common running myths articles have you written in your career?
Like so many, I'm sure. And I think that's just like a very clickbaity headline phrase that when I write those articles is really just about answering questions, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody is Googling, do I really need to fuel during a half marathon? That's a legitimate question. They should get an answer to that. So the debunking myth, I think that's just really like engagement bait, for lack of a better word or phrase. But there are a lot of myths. Again, I think it comes down to the nuance that's necessary in running. There just aren't easy answers to a lot of the questions. There are guiding principles and there are things that science tells you are correct. But I think a lot of those correct approaches have a spectrum to them. Using gels as an example, it's like you might need 5 gels during a marathon and I might need 8. Neither one of us is wrong. You can't say that every runner needs a gel every 30 minutes in a marathon. So I like to think when I'm writing those debunking myths articles, it's really just about answering a question and providing some of that nuance that maybe there isn't the space for people to do on something like Threads or in, a 90-second reel on Instagram.
Speaking of kind of the changing mediascape, what are the trends? This might not be a nice fun answer. What are the trends that you are noticing in the running media space in this, this day and age?
I don't know. If I had a better answer for that, maybe I would be making more money because I'd be getting more assignments. I don't know. I think right now we have a really strong focus on SEO, which is, the terms that you search on Google, the questions that you have that you want a reputable source to answer. And ecom, which is product roundups and things like that. And I think it's great that there is a focus on those things because those evergreen articles will help runners for years. And the product recommendations, it's hard to sift through all that stuff. So having writers, kind of distill things down to the top 10 or top 5, whatever, that is helpful. What I would like to see from the media landscape right now is more storytelling that doesn't have an immediate ROI on it, right? Like you're not making affiliate dollars, you're not upping your ranking in Google. There are a lot of stories that I think aren't being told within the running community because there just isn't a place to tell them right now.
Like what?
Yeah.
Like what stories?
Now you want me to give away all my good pitches? I don't know. A couple stories that I've been interested in recently is like the rise in female-led sports marketing companies and the lack of representation, the lack of female representation for female athletes. There's a big difference being repped by a woman or coached by a woman versus a man if you are a woman. And so why is that happening now? What do we need to do to make that the norm? Like there's a business trend story there that I think is really interesting. I think there are some stories about what's happening with elite athletes and life skills that they are being taught or not being taught as part of a team or as a sponsored athlete. One story I really wanted to tell last year was how On Athletic Club is now offering like 360 degrees of training for their athletes. So you're not just getting nutrition and performance training, you're getting financial training and you're being taught how to use social media and as like brand marketing. And these are marketable skills or life skills that athletes need in order to succeed in their sport. But they're also full-time jobs for a lot of people. And so it's very hard to perform at the top of your game and also manage an entire brand via social media. And there was I recently got a pitch about a new health insurance company or health company geared towards athletes who are not getting that from either their sponsor or they're not with a sponsor yet. And so they're essentially a freelancer like I am, and nobody's paying their health insurance and they don't have access to great healthcare. And so that doesn't have like an immediate payoff for a publication like, oh, people are going to click through and buy this product and we're going to get, a percentage of that. Or, this is going to rank us higher in Google, which boosts our traffic, which leads to more ad dollars or whatever. They're just interesting stories about the culture and industry of running. And I just think sometimes those stories get left behind, but people would love to read them because isn't that interesting? Don't you want to know that athletes are struggling in this area and like, what can we do to change the industry to help them? I don't know. Those are just two like very off the cuff ideas.
I mean, I would read those stories. I love long form journalism, so that's me.
I think a lot of legacy publications are also still driven by quantity over quality. And that's not to say that those publications aren't putting out quality content, because they absolutely are. But having worked at traditional publishing companies, Hearst, Condé Nast, and the magazines that they own, there is was a huge emphasis on the amount of content that you're putting out, because a lot of it, especially, 5 to 10 years ago, was driven by social media. We've got to be able to get stuff on Facebook every hour, on Twitter every hour. And so it was just this churn of content. And I think that is still true and is still driven by social media, and not just for magazines, but also for content creators on those platforms. You've got to game the algorithms to a certain extent. If you're not posting consistently, then you're getting left behind. We start to see these platforms morph into platforms that reward engagement and time spent on them, maybe more than just the amount of content that people are producing. To me, it feels reactive a lot of the time instead of proactive. And I would like to be a little more proactive in the way I create content instead of just, I got to get something up. I haven't posted something on Instagram in 3 days and like, it's going to tank my reach. And then this won't perform well. I don't know. It's exhausting.
It is exhausting. I think where a lot of people get overwhelmed with information overload is that everybody feels like they have to say something about everything or else they will lose visibility, right? And if you are making your livelihood off of visibility in some capacity, that's your paycheck right there.
The people who are truly, truly successful at that, I think it's a much smaller percentage than it appears on those platforms. And so right now, I think we're in this era where everybody thinks that they can do it. And then they're realizing how much work it really takes to do that as a full-time job. I mean, it's a lot of work. You're doing like 8 different jobs within that job.
Oh, yeah. No, trust me. You and I both know that.
Yeah. When really there's just such a small percentage that will truly achieve that autonomy and control over a platform. And it's not because the other people aren't good at it. There's just so many people trying to do it that it's oversaturated at this point. And I don't know. I don't think it's sustainable.
So speaking of trends in sustainability, do you like my segue there? For a while, that was a big one. Remember, we had the recycled plastic, clothes, and we had the zero waste. Are you seeing any trends towards more sustainability initiatives from companies, or is that something people aren't really talking about anymore?
I think it's just a given at this point. I've talked with brands about this a couple times, and it's always mentioned in their products, how much is recycled, the carbon output, the carbon emissions. The brands are definitely talking about those things. It doesn't sell product though. I have heard from different brands that going all in on that just doesn't move the needle over performance. People want performance over sustainability. They like if their performance products also had sustainable elements to it, but they're not going to just buy a shoe because it's good for the environment, or
interesting.
Something that I've thought could be an interesting story, but I've never pursued it, was the sustainability factor in traveling for these races. So races have gotten more and more popular. There was like almost 13% increase in race finishers for the top 100 races this year. So more and more people are participating in these events. More and more people are traveling to these events. And like, do we care enough about sustainability to think about the carbon impact that is having on like the travel to that? I don't know. I don't know if people care. I know some people care for sure, but do they care enough to change their habits? Are they not going to, travel to London to run the London Marathon just because it's not great to fly halfway across the world? I don't know, but I think there's an interesting story there.
I would imagine that we'll probably see some decreased interest in some of these larger races once everything just becomes really hot all the time and nobody really wants to travel halfway across the world to run an 85-degree heat when they could do that at home.
I mean, I've talked about this before. I think I don't know if we're going to see decreased interest. I think we're going to see a shift in the race schedules. So, Berlin won't take place in September. Boston, well, I don't know if Boston will ever move.
They will move Boston when hell freezes over.
I think about New York has been moved before. It was originally in October and then they moved it back to November. And that was because of weather. And so I wonder what races are going to make that move for the safety of the people participating. Are we going to see races just start earlier and earlier? Are we going to be racing at 3:30 in the morning to avoid the heat? I don't know. But I do think that is a bigger problem that's coming sooner rather than later to the running industry, because I wrote a story about this for Runner's World, how hot is too hot for a marathon, and talked to a couple race directors, one for Twin Cities, which was canceled due to heat, New York. I feel like there was another one. Oh, Peachtree Road Race in Atlanta, which is a 10K, but is historically incredibly hot and has, had to issue black flag warnings for the event. And so as the races get bigger and bigger and we have newer runners participating in them, older runners participating in them, they become more dangerous just because of the conditions. So what are these races going to do to protect themselves from any negative outcomes in hot conditions? So there were some interesting solutions in that article, and I'll be curious to see kind of over the next 5 to 10 years how those things shake out, because I do think that that is a real one. And also, we're talking about heat, but wildfires.
Mm-hmm.
Like those have a very significant health effect. And we're going to see it. We're seeing it play out right now with LA. Like, what will it take to get an event in that location to a point where it can be safe for the community and for the people participating? So that's one that I really do think we're going to see very real effects happening over the next 5 years.
The safety part of it, some people have a real, there was a real backlash to the Twin Cities cancellation. And I get it, right? It was canceled the night before. And there were so many people who didn't seem to understand how dangerous those conditions were. When we looked at the real feel of that day, it was going to be in the 90s. I would be interested to see how the running community and especially race directors are able to communicate what needs to change and the changes that they're going to make in a way that doesn't piss a bunch of people off, because they're going to need to change something.
Well, I think a lot of times the communities getting the most pissed off are how do I say this in a not mean way, but the more traditional runners, people who are faster, who have, a lot of experience doing these type of events. They're like, it's not a big deal. I'll be done before, if we're starting at 7 a.m., I'll be done before those conditions. And they forget that as running grows, it's not just about the people who will be done before X time. Generally, the people who are most at risk in those conditions are the people who are starting the latest. And so that's what the race director said. You have to remember that there's, they're making decisions for they're trying to make the best decision for everyone who's participating in the event. And that may mean making a call that maybe wouldn't have affected those earlier runners, but is potentially saving lives for those later runners. And I saw it at Boston at the finish line last year. That was carnage. And it wasn't even that hot comparatively, but the people coming in towards the end of the race were just you could tell that they had suffered out there because they were exposed to the sun for longer. They were just out there in those conditions. And a lot of times they're running out of their resources a lot sooner than somebody who's at the front of the race. And so that's something that race directors can do. They can, make decisions that allow for more water, more misters, things that protect those people who are going to be out there for longer. But sometimes that's just not the answer. And I think one of the topics that I really like covering is the business of these events, right? Well, why can't we just add another wave to the New York City Marathon so more people can contribute or can participate? And it's well, because they're already paying almost $1 million to shut down that bridge. And if they do that if they extend the race to be open longer, you're paying that much more to have the streets shut down for longer. You're paying for more law enforcement and medical personnel to be out there on the course all day. And maybe that's possible, but you're going to see it in your registration fee. And then people are going to get mad about that. And so I think it's so awesome that there are so many new runners, but I would love to help educate some of those newer runners about the business of marathoning and the reasons, not just marathoning, any race, the reasons that race directors are making the decisions that they do, because they're not just doing it arbitrarily. You can complain about race costs, but it's not that they're just looking to make a profit. They're also choosing those registration fees based on inflation and the growing race sizes and the things that they need to cover, anything from, like I said, law enforcement and medical personnel to getting the permits to shut the road down and for as long as you need it shut down, and even trash pickup after a race. People just don't think about those things, and they all cost money. So again, it comes down to being more of a critical thinker when you're looking at this information and maybe doing a little research to see why were these decisions made? What do these costs cover? Why didn't they think it was safe to be out in that kind of heat, instead of just immediately getting enraged and sharing that on social media?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Especially larger races are already expensive. And I know there's a lot of conversations about accessibility, and that's a conversation for another time in terms of fairness, and what things cost, even without adding in travel to major cities around the world. But yeah, I mean, we could have some of these features in place, but your race entry fee would go up. Even if
Yeah.
you took away the t-shirt, which I know some people are like, well, just take away the t-shirt. And I'm like, okay, that's probably like
Yeah.
$7.
Right.
Like,
That's not
they
going
get those
to,
for cheap when they buy that many.
yeah. I mean, I think, so we're very clearly still in this running boom, which is awesome, because the more people that participate in the sport, the more it hopefully elevates the other ends of the sport, like better accessibility to watching professional competitions, or more benefits to the pro athletes who need to support, a life using this sport. I think that sometimes people, like, they want those things from the growth of running, but then they don't always want to share the sport with new people. And there's a lot of gatekeeping going on. I mean, you see it on social media all the time. And we just can't do that. Like, we're all just doing this for fun. If you're not a professional athlete with a contract, this is a hobby. You can be serious about a hobby. That's not a dig. Like, this is kind of my job, but it's also a hobby for me. And I do take it very seriously, but ideally not at the expense of anybody else who wants to make it their hobby. And so I feel like the whole running community could do a little bit better job of educating themselves so that everybody does feel welcome. Because the 7-hour marathoner has every reason to be there, just like the 2.5-hour marathoner. You're just faster. That's it. There's nothing makes you more deserving to be on that course than somebody who's running 2 or 3 times as long as you.
Yeah. And in speaking about the running boom, right, having this responsibility to welcome in our newer runners and help create a culture and a community that is supporting what we're trying to accomplish as runners, in terms of, how can we do this in a way that benefits everybody, while providing good information and making things as accessible as we reasonably can.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing this as a hobby, you're doing it for the benefits, right? Whether it's the mental health benefits or the community benefits or whatever. You can be focused on performance, but there's so much more to it. And why wouldn't you want other people to experience and have those benefits as well? I mean, I can't tell you how many people that I've gone on like runs with early in their running career, journey, whatever you want to say. And being able to talk about the community and the mental health benefits and just the things beyond just like, oh, and I got faster. That's what gets people to stick with it. It's not just the performance benefits. And so when you get people to stick with it because of those other reasons, they are happier, healthier people in the long term. And isn't that what we want? Like, there's so much bad stuff happening that, like, can we not just like create this space where everybody feels welcome and everybody enjoys it, whether, you can run 2 minutes faster per mile than somebody or not? We're all here for the same reasons.
Yeah, we're all on the same side.
Exactly. Let's have fun with it.
So speaking of the community aspect, I think one of the biggest recent trends that we have seen, and is still very trendy, is the rise of the re-rise of the run club. They're so popular now.
Okay, wait, I have some data from Strava, but they do their year in sport report at the end of every year. And so in 2024, they found that 58% of people made new friends through a fitness group. And 48% of people say that social connections are their top reason for joining a fitness group. So, and that's not running specific, but I think that goes to show that it's not just about trying to find a partner. And yes, it's way better to meet somebody, a potential partner, in real life situation versus on an app. But again, it's doing people a disservice to say that that's only what they're there for. I have met all of my best friends in Colorado through my running club, and my life in Colorado would not be what it is if I hadn't joined this run club a month after I moved here. And I lived in New York for a really long time, which now has a very strong running community. But when I lived there, it had very few run clubs and they were all really intimidating. And so I never joined them. And I was lonely a lot of the time. That totally changed living in a place where run clubs were a much bigger part of the community. And I mean, New York has changed now post COVID, but I think that's really important that run clubs are part of the boom in social fitness that are just providing people with sort of like a third space to go to outside of their home and work where they can be around other people and they're doing so in a very healthy way. So it's just so much more than dating. What else? There was some other.
Well, the inclusivity is a huge piece of it because you're right. It used to be that run clubs were tended to be a lot of very fast runners.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was like a track club or it was people who were from the area who had grown up running together. Like it felt very, having, tried to join some of those clubs. It felt very kind of like insular and, oh, I don't belong here. But it's so different now. There's so many different clubs. There's so many different options. They're so welcoming. Do you have any guidance for somebody who wants to find a running club? Like how to find the one that fits them?
I mean, I think you just have to show up.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hardest part. It's scary, I think, to show up to a group event where you don't know anybody. But the beauty of running is that you're all doing the same thing. And once you get there, I guarantee you will be able to find somebody willing to run with you. Even if the club ends up not being quite the right fit, they're a little too fast for you, or maybe they take it a little too seriously, whatever it is. You just have to show up and try it, because what you see on social media where they might, advertise themselves, or what your friend says, you won't know until you go. And I would have been very intimidated by my current run club if a friend hadn't brought me. And most of the people at that point in the run club were much faster than me. And I never ran alone. I was still acclimating to altitude. I didn't know what I was doing. I was marathon training, dying of dehydration and couldn't breathe on these runs. And still somebody would run with me every time. I never got left behind, but that's not true of all groups. Some groups are no drop. And so you want to do your research ahead of time. But if you think that a club seems like it might be a fit for you, you just have to show up and just be open to it too. Be open to talking to people. One of the things I really hate when people do in the running community is, oh, I'm not a runner, but you're a runner, show up and own it. Even if you're a new runner, even if you've never run a race before, if you are there, you are a runner and you have every right to be there. So don't make excuses for yourself. Just embrace it and see what happens, because that's the only way to really find your community.
There are so many runners who are hesitant to join events like that because they are concerned they'll be the slowest one there. And I've talked to runners who have those concerns, and their paces range from, you could probably qualify for Boston with that pace, to paces that are on the 6-7 hour marathon spectrum. And what I think is very interesting is that it's always the same. I'm afraid that I won't belong. Right. That's really what the fear is. I'm afraid that if I show up, I won't have a place. I won't belong. And I think that's our fear as human beings with everything. Right. I want to be part of this, but I'm afraid if I put myself out there, I won't be welcome. And that's a really hard thing to get past, especially if you have been in situations where you did try to, join and they didn't accept you, or it wasn't the right fit. But I hope that that's changing now because there are so many options.
I do think that because there are so many options, it does feel more welcoming than it's felt in the past. But I also think that a lot of that is in your own head. And I mean, I felt that way too. I have friends who, say they want to get a BQ because they don't think the club will respect them otherwise. Or, oh, I'm too slow, so I can't run with this group, so nobody takes me seriously. And it's to be totally truthful, nobody cares. Nobody cares about your pace more than you do, at least. And so when I look at my friends, yeah, I care if they had a good workout, or if they PR'd their race, or if they're proud of what they did, whatever. But I don't care what the time was. I don't care, if they had to walk, or whatever fear they have that they think is going to make people not take them seriously. I walk during every single one of my long runs because I'm dramatic and sometimes I hate it. So I think you just have to remember that we're all in the same boat and we're all doing this thing. And yeah, some people seem more naturally gifted at it than you may be, but that's okay. If they're a good person, they're there's no ego, the best run clubs are the ones where you have people who can run, like a sub 3 hour marathon with people who are 4+ hour marathoners, and they don't care because it's about community. And so if you're the kind of person who has those feelings, I would say maybe you wouldn't want to go to a more like performance focused training club, and you'd be better served by more of a social club to start with, at least. But I think it's just really important for people to understand that that's mostly in your head. Most people are not thinking about your paces, your race times, your anything. They're just going to be like excited to run with you. Like, welcome to the club,
Yeah, that's tough. It's tough for people to get out of our own way sometimes, right?
It is. I mean, it really, really is. But again, it goes back to that mental health side of the sport. Like, if you're never going to enjoy it and you're never going to get the most out of it if you can't get out of your own head. And maybe that means being the slowest at a run sometimes. I think I was the slowest out of my group who was at the 5K this weekend, and I came in like a minute behind everybody else, and I was like, okay. But like, who cares? I still ran a good time, and everybody was waiting for me, and they were
Yeah.
all happy for me. Like, nobody was like, oh, you took too long, so, we went ahead to breakfast. Yeah. But to your point, it is the minority. Those are minority voices. They happen to be very loud because social media rewards loud voices. But if you can get past those and sort of take them with the grain of salt that they deserve, like, you will find the better people in the community. And it may take going to a couple run clubs before you find your people, and that just might be because, I don't know, maybe you prefer a morning donut run to a nighttime beer run. Like, there's a million different ways that run clubs show up within the community. And so you just have to be willing to try a few out, and you will eventually find your people. But you're never going to find them if you're too intimidated to try. So it's like, I mean, there's a reason the Nike slogan has like stood the test of time. You just have to do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Ashley, as we wrap up, are there any trends that you are seeing go away that you are like, bye, enough of that. Thank God that's over with now. I'm so glad we're not dealing with that anymore.
Yeah, I will say one that I'm kind of excited that we're moving past is this like no days off mentality. I mean, people still do it. Obviously, like things like 75 hard are, very trendy this time of year. There are brands that promote like the no days off challenges. Even like Runner's World has running streaks and whatnot. And like, if you're into that, that's great. But I think overwhelmingly, the community has started to embrace more of like a balanced approach to training. And I mean, I've been writing about the importance of rest and recovery and how those are just as important as hard training since like 2018. I think I wrote my first article about that. And I do feel like as we're experiencing so much burnout in other aspects of our life, people are finally starting to recognize that like rest can actually be a better tool in your training than pushing yourself through the pain. So this like whole no pain, no gain mentality, it's been on its way out for a while, but I definitely think in the last year, we've really seen a more widespread embrace of like easy pace should be easy. Rest days are an important part of training. It's okay to add an extra rest day if you need one. Not everything is like 110% all the time. And I know like personally, when I finally let go of some of that, like you always have to be trying hard, I got better because I was better balancing my training. And I'm happy to see that that's just become like more of the norm.
Always like interpreted no days off as more of a mindset thing. Even on days that you're not running, you're still dedicated towards your goal. But
that's a great spin on it.
Was it literal? Was it like I know the company you're talking
I think
about.
it was more literal.
Like,
I think
don't take any, go every day, go.
Yeah. Or even just this idea of like the no pain, no gain mentality where it's like you have to be suffering for it to be paying off. And I think that can be especially hard for new runners to navigate because it's like running is hard. And even if you're running a very easy pace at the beginning of your running journey, that can feel like a hard effort. And it might feel like that for like a month, a couple months. And understanding that like hard is part of the training but it shouldn't be all of the training, is where you start to see breakthroughs. And so even the mentality, like I like your spin on it a lot better than the like true no days off approach, but I still think even mentally, you shouldn't be so engaged all the time. I think when people take running a little less seriously, or any fitness modality a little less seriously and as a part of their life instead of their life, you are a more well-rounded person, and that makes you a better runner because you're allowing yourself to take breaks, to check out a little bit, to take care of yourself in other ways. And nobody can be on 100% of the time. Nobody can be like fully engaged 100% of the time. That is a recipe for burnout, even if it's just in your head.
Ashley, I do by and large like where we're going as a running community. I think that obviously, there's always growing pains and technological who knows what is coming down the pipeline, but I really appreciate your insight as connected as you are to the forefront of the running world. You provide such excellent information, not just in the publications that you write for, but in your newsletter. So if people are interested in learning more about your expertise, and trust me, you do want to learn more, Ashley, where can people do that?
I would say the best place to find me is on Instagram. That's where you can find links to the newsletter, to my articles, to threads where I'm sharing a lot of opinions these days. But I would say that's sort of the home base. Come find me on there and say hi.
Excellent. And that's going to be linked in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your voice in the running community. Again, thinking about the example that we want to set in the community that we're trying to become for runners. I just love that you are in it. So thank you.
Thank you. Right back at you, honestly. I don't know how to say that better myself.